Let's see, people. How you guys doing? I've never actually done this before, so we'll see if this actually works or not. Okay. All right. We'll wait to see a little bit to see if we get any messages. Otherwise, in about 2 minutes, I'll jump in and kind of talk about some of the security tools that I use. The free ones, they have paid options, but mostly free options that allow us to kind of get things going and start seeing some visibility in mostly dev environments or in code repositories, those type of things. So we'll put this up here. I'm going to wait a little bit on that one. Let's see how this goes. If it's really quiet, we'll close early. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully people will show up. I didn't really promote this that well, so learning for me. So see if people are interested in security out there and have the time. We'll post this out there and see if anyone's interested. All right, well, we're a minute into it, so I'll start from here. We'll kind of go as long or as short as needed. Like just to start off, so everyone, I'm Charles Green. I'm the founder of SimplyCubed. We're a Japan-based security consulting company. The kind of primary areas we work in are Kubernetes, code repositories, looking to do things like penetration tests and security review. And I'm going to stop there. Like, it's not really a sales pitch. Just kind of my background, what I've been doing is a lot of things Kubernetes. What I'm hoping to do today is to be able to share some of the tools and hopefully answer some questions for people that are either working on something. This is kind of my wanting to give back and help other people. So I'll plan to do this weekly or bi-weekly, kind of based on the needs and interests from other people. But it really is to hopefully build a community and kind of get to know people interested in security. You don't have to be directly work in security. Don't have to be an engineer for that fact. It's basically people that have an interest in security and want to improve both of their security online. Could be end user security. Helping to secure your own accounts. It could be you're building some tools and you're looking to see how you can make it so that the tools you're building get deployed and you're working with your customers as securely as possible. For me, it's amazing. Like when I look at like my security or what the things that I do to kind of protect my accounts and my data, I do common kind of sensible things. You set up try to not use passwords where possible. Definitely use two-factor or multi-factor authentication. Some basic things like that. The biggest one is actually just trying not to put stuff online. Now, if I take that the next step and I look at what I do for to help protect like my customers or my client data or their customers' data, I'll do way more than what I'll do for mine, just because at the end of the day, like it really ends up being, the impact. So to kind of, I guess, help us get going. So that, looking at from I'll say a software developer's point of view or a security engineer's point of view, security can really be in two sides. There's a lot of domains, but I basically look at the operations, and that's things like your security operations center, your SOC, being able to see what's going on in your environment through logs. If you're on cloud platforms, a lot of the cloud platforms will have tools like on Google, you have Security Center. You have the same thing on AWS and Azure. Utilizing those tools, it's amazing how often they're kind of overlooked or neglected. Even if it's maybe not all the features and functionality that some of the full-blown dedicated systems are, they go a really long ways. So starting there, basically being able to use, like your built-in tools that are in the cloud platform that you're using. If you're looking at like on-prem solutions, I'm going to kind of ignore that for this conversation because if you're doing it and you're doing it right, then you already have the tools that you need. So this won't be very helpful. It's also honestly not a space I work a lot in. Definitely clients have on-prem, but it's generally like a hybrid solution where they run a lot of things on both on-premise as well as on cloud. So looking at some of the tools around that, I'll share a couple of links, but just to kind of help with that, I'll start by kind of looking at the first one, and that is if you're using code repositories or so. For example, I use GitHub a lot. Actually, I used GitHub in the past. I went away from it to a couple of other solutions that were fine. Went back, and one of the huge advantages that GitHub actually offers is a lot of built-in, automatically available security tools. So, for example, if you look at GitHub has Dependabot. Dependabot is used to look at your package updates to make sure that you're running the latest version of different packages available. So for example, if you have a project and you have some dependencies, like say it's a web application or a sample, you've cloned a sample application and you just want to see, are your packages up to date or are they out of date? Generally, if they're out of date, they will have a lot more security issues that are known. And, it's all about reducing the risk. So where possible, you definitely want to try to keep your packages up to date. But if you use Dependabot within GitHub, for example, it has a really cool automatic PR feature. And it's probably going to sound like I'm promoting and I'm running a GitHub a consultancy, but I don't. I'm not associated with them in any way. It's just the product is awesome when it comes to some of the security benefits. So, for example, like with Dependabot, you can not only just turn it on. One extra step actually is you can ask it to raise automatic pull requests so that it'll bump the versions that you have. Now, you can't just blindly accept any dependency increase. You have to be smart about it. I mean, you have to pull it down. You have to for example, if you have a clone of the repository, you have to check out that branch. You have to test it to make sure it still works. There's a whole slew of things that you have to do, but at least you're aware. So it's all about the visibility. Like you're aware there's a new version of a package that came out, or you're aware that one of the dependencies down your dependency tree, like the dependency of your dependency, if you will, also has an update. So it's all about getting the visibility first. So Dependabot allows you to do that. It's not directly security. However, if you're using like GitHub Advanced Security, which is an enterprise solution, or if you, it's also available on public repositories, but you have access to what they call CodeQL. So GitHub bought a company called Seml a few years ago, and Seml allows you to do what they call static code analysis. The static code analysis basically allows you to scan the code that you wrote, not just your dependencies to check for out-of-date versions, but allows you to actually scan your code to see if there's anything that looks like a vulnerability. CodeQL has a way that you can actually write what they call a signature. I don't know if that's actually the term or not, to be honest. You can create a signature of what the problem is that you're looking for. and then you run your own queries against it. The other option is GitHub has really helped out in terms of automating this process by using something like machine learning to be able to look at all of the code that runs in GitHub, to be able to look for common problems, and then to actually help to identify problem areas that you didn't know you had. It's amazing how efficient this is and how well it works. The only downside is with using like the machine learning aspect of it is it does increase your false positives. So just because something was raised saying that, hey, this is a problem, doesn't mean it is. It just means that, hey, this looks like it. You have to go and actually check to see if you think it is or not. One of the biggest sources of false positives, at least when you're using CodeQL, has to do with input. So input validation, are you using, say, for example, a value that you get from the user directly within a query, without doing any sanitization and those type of things. So CodeQL is a really good built-in scanning tool. So that's where I would start. Like if you have a free GitHub plan, then you basically start with Dependabot with automatic PRs enabled. If it's an open source public repository, then you can turn on CodeQL scanning automatically. If you have private repositories, you do have to have an enterprise plan, and you have to contact them to work out whatever the deal that is. But that's a first starting point, which is it takes us a long ways. Like that helps us to get a lot of visibility. If you then look at some of the built-in tools that, for example, if you're doing JavaScript development or if you're doing Python, there's a lot of, or I use Go a lot. So if you look at these languages, they generally come with a built-in, like NPM has NPM audit or yarn audit, which allows you to check your dependencies that are located in like the package JSON file. It will check for version numbers or like the lock file. It'll check for version information to tell you these are the known problems with your dependencies. Now it's only known, so it's not going to scan your code for your problems, but it's going to help you find, any dependency you have, their problem is your problem at the end of the day. So using just the built-in command line tools like npm, and for Python, I use Bandit a lot. There's another very similar tool. It basically does a check to see, hey, these are your dependencies. Also, when we look at it, it's going to say, here are a couple of problems we found. Now, this has a lot to do with, linters or just known issues. It's not really scanning your code to find problems. And that's one of the biggest challenges. So a lot of the free open source tools are amazing, but they really focus in on understanding only what are known vulnerabilities that have been submitted already to the like the CVE database. And of course, that's the first place to start. So like that, when you start out, like that's the best place to start, because the amount of code that is in your project coming from dependencies is just usually vastly outweighs the small amount of code in comparison that your team or you have written. So it's definitely the best cases where you start there working with your dependencies. So npm has one at Yarn. They both have like npm audit, Yarn audit. Python has Bandit. If you look at Go, so Go is interesting. So you have Golang has a linter or a GoSec. So interesting thing is about Golang lint is actually it's a collection of scanning tools, and it's built in a modular way that allows you to have, it's tens, if not over 100 different scanners, and each one has a different purpose. And of course, you don't turn all these on by default. What you do is you say which ones you want specifically. Generally, the default, they have some enabled, like GoSec, for example, will scan your dependencies for vulnerabilities. The next place with all of these tools is actually to look at linters. So a linter, mainly it started out as just doing formatting of code, but it also linters can be used to find uh, problem areas. So for example, if you have a team of one or just one person, and you're the only person building everything on your project, then of course your code will look one way. And over time, as you get more experience, your code will change. You'll get more skilled, hopefully, and your ability to develop will improve over time. And if you don't use a linter and you just simply keep on working on the project, you're going to find some parts of your application get kind of out, and kind of the formatting changes. It becomes harder to read. And because we read so much more than we actually write and understanding the code, like the next phase is actually doing linters. And if you use a linter, you can get auto formatting. So the one for like Go FMT, for example, is amazing. Some people love it or hate it, but the goal is actually just to make, if it doesn't matter who the programmer is on the Go side, if you've written Go, you should all look at the same. You should be able to see, this person's style over here, this person's style there, because it adds complexity. So basically, if you take that all away and you say, we're going to format it all automatically one way, it makes reading it and understanding the code much easier. So, it's kind of first work with GitHub or your source code provider of choice. Get all of the available, update tooling that comes with it enabled. That'll give you some visibility. From there, use the command line tools that are built in to the programming languages of your choice to be able to get the known vulnerabilities. And that usually comes from, like npm audit, for example. The next phase after that is to look at linting. And the best part about all of this is you can actually tie all of this directly into your pipeline. So if you're using GitHub, you can use GitHub Actions. If you're using DevOps repositories and pipelines, you can enable a pipeline. And the best part about this is you don't have to configure your local environment. If you have 10 people working on a team, you don't have to make sure all 10 people have it set up exactly the same way. What you do is you suggest, or you try to keep it basic as much as possible. You push your code, it automatically scans, automatically does some formatting or adjustment if needed. And it gives you output directly within your pipeline every time you push your code. So you don't have to think in the back of your mind of when do I need to go and actually process some of this code, or like process running a linter or manually running any task. It's just automatically on every time you push your code. Which actually brings us to the next challenge. If you worked in a team or within a company, over a period of time, you're going to have some projects that are active and some that are inactive. Now, security doesn't stop and vulnerabilities don't stop for anyone. So just because you haven't made a coding change, it doesn't mean that there aren't any new vulnerabilities. So time is actually our biggest challenge in this case. So if we look at, for example, you have a repository, it's a very simple application. Say it's it does some, it's a web server, it does some redirects or something like that. Maybe it's a web callback, and you push it out and your code's live. It's very simple. There's no updates you have to make. You don't know actually if any of the dependencies in your application have become vulnerable, where maybe yesterday there wasn't any problems, but somebody was digging around, a researcher was trying to find it, or someone on your team was digging in, and they found, oh, here's a problem, and they've raised this new vulnerability. Now, the only way, if you only use this push mechanism, that you'll find it is the next time you make a change, you'll find it, and that's not, or the next time you have an update, the Dependabot will pick it up and say, hey, there's a new version of this file. But of course, it's ideal. The sooner that you can find and respond to that problem, the better. So for example, if you go into like a GitHub action, instead of just using like open on push or a pull request, you can actually set a schedule to say, I'm going to run this pipeline, once a week or once every 3 days or however often it is. You have to balance out the cost with, the the chance of risk. So if you have something with a lot of dependencies, you want to run it more often. If you have something with a lot less dependencies, maybe less often. And kind of judge that for yourself to see where it's at. Now, if you have this automatically running on a schedule, then even projects that you're not touching anymore, you can be aware of what's going on. The whole goal of this is to get visibility into what's happening in your code base from a security or dependency point of view. From there, depending on how your company works, I generally like to use Slack. Other people can use Discord and stuff like that. It's one of those things where I have a dedicated channel for security notifications. So what happens is I've configured it so that when my pipelines run and a security problem is found, it'll push that problem directly to that channel. So I can see that if, a Dependabot ran and it found some problems and it'll put them into the channel, then I can actually just kind of scan the channel. Oh, there are some new changes today. Let me go take a look at those pull requests that were automatically created for me. Let me go look at some of the vulnerabilities that were found. So the whole goal here is to simplify, and all of this is free. Like, you don't have to actually pay for any of this. Like, I haven't actually, except for like the code QL on a private repository, everything else is free that I've been talking about. It's simply off the shelf. Taking a step back a little bit from looking at the code, we also have to look at how do we deploy the code. So this is where we want to start looking at things like, I deploy a lot of stuff on Kubernetes, which is running in containers. So of course, I want to look at not only my application, but I also want to look to see the container that's running. Is it secure? Is it up to date? Because if there are vulnerabilities in it, that means that I also am responsible for that. So if you look at, for example, I use Google a lot. I use Azure a lot. We have to check on AWS side, but I believe you can get automatic code scanning there as well, or container scanning there as well on a container repository. I do the most work on this when it comes to Azure and Google for sure. So by default on Google, it's actually container scanning is disabled in any GitHub project. Google project, for example. So if you're using like Google Container Registry or artifacts, container scanning is disabled. So you have to go in and actually just enable it. Now, of course, if you're using something there, you generally have to pay, but like the free tier is usually most for even medium-sized teams. If you have a half a dozen or a dozen people working on a project, you're spending very little amount of money when it comes to, if any money at all, when it comes to container and registry, container scanning. There is a bit of work you have to do in terms of getting the notifications out, so you don't have to just go look inside the console all of the time. But basically, if you look at where you're storing your containers, your images, if you're storing them in your cloud provider, so I generally like to use GitHub to store my code. If I'm working with Google, then what I'll do is I'll actually sync so that I can use Google Cloud Build with my GitHub account. So when I do a push, in this case, I'm using the Google triggers. Google triggers and Cloud Build to actually build images, run my pipelines, store my containers inside my cloud provider. So I usually handle those there. At the same time, though, I can still use the GitHub side. Say, for example, I can still use a GitHub action for anything like developer facing. So if I need to run tests, or if I need to run security checks, or if I have to run linting, I can still do that on the GitHub side. It's just I'm now going to be running my container image builds on the Google side, for example, where I'll do a build and I'll push to like the container registry, and then within the container registry, I set up to do automatic scanning, and then I can get notified of when a vulnerability is found. On the GitHub side, before I jump too far ahead, if you look at uh, when you set up like the Pendabot, where it can automatically open pull requests, you can actually set the language. And if you set it to Docker, then you can actually have it scan your Docker images for version numbers as well. And that's really handy. So that you can also get your Docker container versions updated. But once you get the containers inside of your like Google, for example, you can have the automatic scanning that's happening. Now, this is all static scanning. It has nothing to do with dynamic or profiling or anything like that at this point. That gets quite advanced when you get to that point. But when you're just starting out, like these are things that you can automatically turn on by default. Aqua Security they published a couple of tools. One, they have one tool that's called Divi, TV. I often pronounce it wrong, but that actually will do. It's an open source tool that you can use to scan your containers or your images to help you find vulnerabilities there. So, like, there's a ton of tools. At the end of the day, if you have an interest, you can go to GitHub. You can do a search for security scanner for your language. You can find a list of them. There's more than enough. And then it's just about trying to make a good assessment to find out what tool is good for you. And that comes down to the language. It comes down to the community. An easy way to be able to see good social proof is, for example, looking at the number of GitHub stars that are associated with projects, which by themselves aren't a good enough indicator, but it is a good solid starting point. The other part of it is looking at how often the repositories for these scanners are updated. Like, are they actively worked on? Because if you're going to be going through the process of actually building these scanners into your pipelines, you want to make sure that they have a healthy community around them. So at the end of the day, like, all of this will help you get more visibility into your environment and understanding what's kind of going on, at least within your development teams. And if people have specific questions around, like, getting visibility in other ways, then feel free to ask, and I'm happy to jump in and answer those in a follow-up Ask Me Anything session. The last thing that I want to mention around this is, and this is a non-technical, this is actually what I would do day one if I'm coming into working with a new client or working on a new team, is understand how the security team or how the developers receive bugs or receive risks or receive issues. Like, what is the input flow? So, like, how can anybody in the organization raise a problem that they see? And I'm not talking about a large formalized process unless you work in an organization where that's required. What I'm looking for is there a Slack channel? Is there something where someone can say, hey, I see this kind of funny thing over here that makes me uncomfortable? Or it could be, for example, like I worked in one team quite a few years ago that different teams were actually sending customer data and sharing it with customer data between different teams in the organization over Slack. This is a huge issue. And without actually talking to people, there would be no way that I could have been able to see that. So it's just by building the trust of saying, hey, listen, if you let us know, like, it's all good. Like, we're not going to hold anything against anybody. Just please let us know if you find any, and building that trust. But the other one is just having an easy way that people can let people know, because most people want to help out. Like, if you're basically, take away the idea of like security is the police, or is the guard or whatever it is, and you make it, hey, we're just working together to make sure we can manage the risk that is associated in the company. And we need everyone's help to do this. And you really believe that, and you really build it into, the kind of the communication, the framework of how you're interacting with people. And as soon as you add more steps to this, it'll fall down. The real way is like, what is the least amount of friction? What is the least amount of steps? What is the best way that somebody doesn't have to read the steps on how to do this? Is simply hey, I see a problem and raise my hand. As soon as you can do that, then you can get visibility anywhere in your organization that then you've been able to communicate that message. And if you do it repeatedly and you do it often, and you show people like, hey, or even actually give small swag or something to the people who report the problem. It doesn't matter who made the problem. You don't care about that. It's just raise my hand. Here's a gift. Here's something. Here's some recognition. Whatever it is. It can't be very large, of course, but something, because even the smallest thing will go a long, long way in order to be able to build that that trust, and that behavior is really what you're trying to try to and instill in everyone. Is like, hey, raise your hand, let us know what's going on. So it could be as simple as opening up a Slack channel or a Teams channel. If it's a company where you don't have that trust yet, it could be some form of a Google form or an Office form or something like that. But if you're at that point, it's really important to actually make the submission anonymous and allow the person to build that, add their email or add their name if they want to. We care less about that. We care about what's going on. And then just making sure that, that you kind of build up that trust. So we've kind of gone through looking at some of the different tools from a technical point of view. What is kind of, how do you start building that visibility from a organization point of view? Hopefully this is helpful. Anyhow, if you have any questions, or if this is, if you want to go in a different direction with this, please let me know. We're about 30 minutes in, and I kind of at the end of this, so I've thrown a lot at you. I'll share some links to all of the tools in the YouTube video. If you have any questions, please hit me up. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe.